Every story has a beginning. When players nestle in and select new game, their story with a title starts, but the game itself may have already been through its own sagas behind the scenes. After all, crafting artwork is not a straightforward process. There's no blueprint. It takes inspiration, experimentation, and collaboration, sometimes all in surprising ways. This list highlights some beloved video games that all had some unexpected twists and turns in their development. These tales are all proof that anything can happen during the creative process. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games with bizarre origin stories. Number 10. Batman Arkham Asylum was almost a rhythm game. The Caped Crusader has had a lot of different video game appearances over the years, but most of them stand in the great big shadow of the Arkham series. Starting in 2009 with Batman Arkham Asylum, Rocksteady Studios told a satisfying set of stories that Batman fans could be proud of. The true star was the frankly addictive combat system. More than a simple button masher, Arkham Asylum's hand-to-hand violence was all about flow and timing, which makes sense as it was originally devised as something far more akin to a rhythm game. Not only would this have meant more obvious button prompts on screen, but the Batman pummeling waves of goons would have been set to a beat. A specific combat soundtrack was pitched that would have evolved throughout a fight, changing as new enemies joined the fray and altering depending on how many enemies surrounded the player. The final version of the combat certainly feels rhythmic, and discovering that that's where it started makes a lot of sense. Still, if it had maintained the original concept in its purest form, we can only make educated guesses what the music for this would have been like. After all, it wasn't until 2022's The Batman that we all found out that Bruce Wayne's favourite band was in fact Nirvana. Number 9. Resident Evil saved Capcom. Whilst Resident Evil wasn't the first horror video game ever made, it was certainly an attempt by one Capcom developer to prove that the genre was viable within the gaming space. Tokuro Fujiwara had previously developed an NES tie-in to the horror movie Sweet Home. The game was a success, but Fujiwara felt that the limitations of the console stilted his true vision. Convincing Capcom to work on a spiritual successor, Fujiwara acted as producer and handpicked some fresh new blood to work on his pet project in Shinji Mikami. The game went through various different conceptual stages, starting life as an SNES game before hopping to the PlayStation, morphing from first person to the fixed camera angles, and shifting away from the supernatural into zombies and mad science. As it got close to release, however, the game was nearly canned. Capcom had sailed along on the success of Street Fighter II in the early 90s, but that well was drying up. The fighting game sequels had failed to sell, and 3D games were far more expensive to produce. The company hired an American business advisor who suggested pulling the plug on Resident Evil, but Fujiwara pleaded that his superiors see it through to the end. Resident Evil, when it was released, became the best-selling PlayStation game of all time and saved Capcom from financial ruin. Number 8. GTA's Wanted system was an accident. It's hard to imagine the video games industry without Grand Theft Auto at this point, one of the best-selling franchises of all time, but also a series that has had tremendous impact on both game development and design. GTA's over-the-top adult style made waves in turning the hobby into more than something just for kids. But when the first game went into production, it wasn't called Grand Theft Auto, it was called Race and Chase, and was far less outlandish than the finished product. Race and Chase was about head-to-head street races with the police in pursuit, which made the name pretty apt. There was racing and there was chasing. However, a mistaken line of code suddenly changed the behaviour of the officers hot on your tail to be a lot more aggressive. Due to a glitch, the police would ram players off the road if they caught up, causing all kinds of mayhem. For the future Rockstar games, it was a light bulb moment if there ever was one. With this in mind, Race and Chase was significantly retooled with vehicular destruction and general criminal tomfoolery in mind. The Wanted system, that has become a recognisable feature of the series, determines how hostile the police will act towards the player, and it all started with a glitch. Number 7. Conker wasn't always an adult game. In 1997, Diddy Kong Racing released for the Nintendo 64 and included a variety of cute anthropomorphic characters, most of which had never been seen before. One of these, Conker the Squirrel, was set to make his debut in the coming months. At E3 1997, Conker 64 was shown to industry insiders, and whilst it seemed perfectly functional, it was overshadowed by the charm of Banjo-Kazooie. Many even critiqued the game as being too cute, with the potential of reinforcing the negative stereotype that Nintendo was just for kids. Rare, who were developing the game, felt that Conker 64 was missing something and it wasn't coming together as hoped. It was artist Chris Seaver who found the missing element for the project. Bad Fur Day, as he called it, would give the deceivingly cute title a harder edge, with violence and raunchy comedy. The first redesigned questline featured wasps that stole a beehive, and Seaver added in a punchline where the beehive fights back with automated weapons. The entire team loved it. From here, development development on the project was completely refreshed. Platforming gameplay took a backseat to film parodies, scatological humour, and absolute absurdity. Conker totally transformed, shocking those who had once called it too cute, and became Nintendo's second ever mature-rated title. Number 6. Geometry Wars was test software. It's a rare case when you can buy a title that's two great video games for the price of one. Project Gotham Racing 2, the 2003 Xbox racing title, also happened to include one of the niftiest Easter eggs known to man, an entirely different game. Whilst in development on the original Project Gotham, Bizarre Creations developer Stephen Cakebread constructed a little test application. Apparently the team were having troubles with the prototype Xbox controllers, in particular the right analog stick, and Geometry Wars was put together as a means to explore their issues and test the controller out. However, this little experiment was too good not to share with the world. In Project Gotham Racing 2, Geometry Wars can be found on an arcade cabinet sitting in the player's garage. Many Xbox gamers found themselves falling in love with it, so much so that the title got its own broader independent release on the Xbox Live Arcade store and became one of the store's best sellers because of it. It truly only needed to be simple to fit its purpose, which is why Geometry Wars' art style is really just mathematical shapes and bright, beautiful colours. Through its simplicity, players found something calming and addictive, and Bizarre Creations inadvertently created a new franchise. Number 5. JeanClaude Van Damme almost killed Mortal Kombat. One thing that every good fighting game needs to succeed is a strong cast. Think of any of the big franchises within that genre and you're immediately conjuring up a host of classic and iconic character designs. Mortal Kombat is absolutely no different. In fact, it may well be one of the best in this regard, but it didn't necessarily start off this way. Mortal Kombat co-creators Ed Boon and John Tobias found themselves working with Midway Entertainment, who were extremely interested in their proposal for a fighting game using large digitized characters. Actors would be filmed and then placed into the game's world over sprites. Midway turned down the original pitch for a ninja-themed fighting game and instead wanted to use digitized characters to create a tie-in for JeanClaude Van Damme's Universal Soldier picture. A demonstration was prepared for the actor, but Van Damme was already in talks for another video game project that ironically wound up falling through. So in light of this, Midway allowed Boon and Tobias to chase their original proposal. In ode to this series of events that nearly derailed Mortal Kombat, the pair created Johnny Cage, a Hollywood actor whose split-legged punch to the groin was a nod to a moment in Van Damme's Bloodsport. Number 4. Call of Duty Zombie Mode won over Activision. Despite being a sturdy addition to the Call of Duty franchise, World at War is perhaps known best for being the game that introduced the series' now long-time obsession with the undead. That side game almost didn't happen. After having developed Call of Duty 3, Treyarch were a little burnt out on the real-world warfare, and in order to keep themselves entertained, they worked on a spin-off mode. Nazi zombies allowed teams of 4 to squad up to take on waves of never-ending undead. As much as they enjoyed it though, they didn't see it ever becoming something publisher Activision would ever sign off on, as it was too far removed from the gritty realism that Call of Duty fans had come to expect. However, Treyarch's colleagues in Activision caught wind of the mode and stopped by the office to try it for themselves. They were bowled over by how much fun it was, but agreed that it would be a hard thing to market. So the story goes, Treyarch CEO Mark Lamis then simply suggested to not market it at all. Nazi Zombies was tucked away as an unlockable Easter egg in World at War. As expected, gamers adored it as much as the developers did. As such, the Zombies minigame would become a mainstay of the series. Number 3. Devil May Cry started off as Resident Evil 3. Veteran games director and Twitter block button master Hideki Kamiya's first experience at the head of a project was the 1998 version of Resident Evil 2. With such success under his belt, Resident Evil figurehead Shinji Mikami tasked him with helming up the next game. Set in a Spanish castle on a mysterious island, Kamiya's intentions for Resi 3 starred a pair of twin brothers. Tony and Paul Redgrave, superhumans implanted with biotechnology, would discover they were the sons of Oswald Spencer, the mastermind behind a large part of the Umbrella Corporation's evils. It wasn't just a departure for the story, but also on every other level. Mikami had told Kamiya that the next Resident Evil needn't necessarily be a horror game. Kamiya's use of the words stylish action to describe his hopes for a new combat system would end up being a key phrase to define the new franchise that this idea germinated into. The concepts were worth exploring, but perhaps were not fit for the Biohazard franchise. In development side game, Resident Evil 1.9 became Resident Evil 3 to hold over fans as Kamiya pursued his fresh, exciting new world. Tony and Paul became Dante and Virgil as the game found its own identity and surprise success as Devil May Cry, paving the way for Kamiya's high-octane action style. Number 2. Super Smash Bros. Didn't ask for permission. Masahiro Sakurai looked at the Nintendo 64's 4 controller ports and saw opportunity. Not only was he seeking to create a more casual style of fighting game, reportedly after whooping random Japanese citizens on arcade machines himself, but one that could be enjoyed by more than 2 players at a time. Thus began development of Dragon King, the fighting game, in earnest. Whilst Sakurai was sure of his core gameplay concepts, he knew that fighting games don't sell without a good roster of fighters. Rather than craft something original, however, he mused upon the idea of using already established and recognisable faces through Nintendo's catalogue. Knowing that suggesting what if we make a game where Link beats the piss out of Yoshi would be a pointless endeavour, Sakurai crafted a demo without approval. It's better to ask forgiveness than seek permission. Presenting an early build that starred Mario, Donkey Kong, Samus and Fox McCloud, Nintendo had no choice but to see the promise the project had. Smash Bros. Was born. If they hadn't approved, it's entirely likely that Sakurai's Dragon King the fighting game, as novel as the core 4-player party fighting system was, would never have matched the great heights that the Super Smash Bros. Series has soared to. Number 1. Yakuza Like a Dragon was an April Fool's joke. When April 1st rolls around, it's time to be on your toes. There are plenty of social media managers out there who produce some amusing one-time gags, but occasionally companies will go too far with it. After 7 mainline Yakuza games highlighting the rises and falls of main man Kazuma Kiryu, Sega's Ryuga Gotoku studio was making changes to the franchise with a new leading man. They hadn't necessarily considered a huge departure from the fast-paced beat-em-up style gameplay of the previous titles, but a video they produced for April Fools suddenly made that a possibility. The fake reveal trailer was a good-humoured what-if take on the series if it were a turn-based RPG. Thing was, it was awesome, featuring all the expected silly Yakuza sense of humour and badass environmental attacks. The reaction to such a premise was so positive that the studio retooled the game they'd been working on, turning new hero Kasuga into a Dragon Quest fanboy who sees the world as a video game. Several moments from this April Fool's gag feature in the finished product, which, when it was released in 2017, was so successful that Ryuga Gotoku were already at work on their next JRPG Yakuza title. What started as a silly joke wound up completely revitalising a series. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video in the comments below and any other wild behind-the-scenes video game production stories. There has to be plenty of them out there, of course. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.